Many thanks indeed for joining us here on Morning Prime on this day of the 6th of April 2023. And of course, every Thursday you have Sokoni coming your way, where we get an update of what is happening in matters economy, looking keenly at the markets and how it is faring right now, even globally, when we know there is the biting inflation that is affecting every other country in the world right now. And of course, we are aware that beginning of April as well, that is this month that has just begun, the excess duty is bound to be going up. And people are questioning this excess stamp duty that Kerry or the National Treasury has actually come up with, if it has to go through the approval of Parliament. This announcement was made last week by National Treasury. We shall look how it's bound to be affecting the businessmen and also the cost of power as well. These are things that we've been discussing here with our panel every Thursday. And we follow the saga of Telecom Kenya with new revelations as well, that it was a good decision. This is according to the Cabinet Secretary, the former Cabinet Secretary of Ministry of Information, to actually buy back Telecom Kenya because of fears and trepidation regarding the security of NIS and the military. So that was a wise move. But the question is, was it just for a song? I'm joined this morning by Engineer Patrick Obath, who is the chair of KEPSA Foundation. We'll be joined also later by the chair of Vision 2030, Bunyasi Sakwa, the chair of Kenya Diaspora Alliance, Dr. Shemo Chwodo, and Bill Okero, who is a businessman. Let me just rope in Engineer Patrick Obath to just give us an update so far of how things are faring from his end. And of course, looking forward to the long weekend. Easter is here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
Easter is here, time to celebrate the eventually the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And all matters. That also coincides that it's you have Easter and Ramadan together. Yeah. So it's one of those rare things.
Rare things, and of course, it also sparks a lot of distress, especially in Jerusalem.
It did.
Because everyone now is going to the temple. It is now for the Jews, and it is now for of course, Al-Aqsa temple. You know, the violence that is ongoing. Yeah. Yes.
And actually, I had a very interesting situation. I worked in Malaysia many years back, and there's a weekend, there's a month like this one, where the holidays coincided. You had Eid al-Fitr.
Yes.
And there it is celebrated over 3 days. We had, obviously, Easter.
Yes.
We had the Chinese New Year. And then we had 2 or 3 of their, we had another one of their traditional holidays there. So because they all fell almost on top of each other, we had, and weekends as well, we had almost 2.5 weeks of not going to work. Because of these holidays, right? It's just that one of those instances where they fall on top of each other. So it was Chinese New Year was 3 days, and then the Eid al-Fitr was 3 days, that is 6 days, and then you had Easter, which was the long weekend as it is as it's coming now. Then you had what they call Gawai, which was a sort of a harvest festival, which was also 3 days. So that was almost 2.5 weeks of just holiday.
And sometimes it's very difficult to plan, especially with the Muslim brothers as well, because theirs is not really the Julian. They follow Julian calendar or the Gregorian.
I think they go for the Julian calendar.
Julian calendar, which it has now to go with the sighting of the moon.
Yeah, it follows its cycle. So this was one of those rare coincidences in that country where they all happened at the same time. So a lot of the industries had to actually now work out if they're going to be shut down for 3 weeks, or nearly 2.5 weeks. How do they continue being in business? What do they have to do, and so forth? And where I was working, actually, we said we have to continue running. It was a gas plant that we were using to liquefy natural gas, LNG, and we kept about 30% of the staff, and we kept rotating days off. And then, effectively, what happens? We carried those days forward to later on in the year, so that at least we could keep production going. Yeah, so it's good. We're having this long weekend, and The rains have come,
Yeah.
and which is good. Unfortunately, some places are flooded, but a lot of I started farming avocado. I told you, I was just saying earlier on, and it's good. It's good.
It's good to have those rains.
Yeah, it's good to have good rains.
Right.
Yeah.
What has been the reaction so far with the latest development as well since Sunday? And now we can see we are not really sure because everyone now is, drawing that line in the sand regarding the stand, especially with the bipartnership that is supposed to be in the parliament.
As a Kenyan, without anything else, I'm glad there is some movement towards, towards the discussion. And it would really be helpful for all of us in Kenya if the discussion was about Kenya, about the country, and what needs to happen in the country. And whether it is around, issues to do with the economy and the fact that the cost of food is higher and everything else, we need to unpack that and understand why it is. It may be something that perhaps there is very little that can be done, right, in terms of the remedy, and it may be something that may take a medium to long-term solution to actually take us out of where we are. There may be a necessity to sort of to cushion people from the high costs in one way or another. I'm not an advocate of subsidies.
Yes.
I'm an advocate of long-term solutions in terms of how we do this thing. So that is, that needs to be discussed on the basis of what is good for Kenya, right? And then also, there are obviously, political issues creeping into the equation.
Yes.
Around the body, the IBC and so forth. And these are things that cannot be solved overnight.
Indeed.
And they need a process. And if you remember, we had, those many years back, we had the political process where they were discussing the revision of the Constitution.
Yes.
And that took several bombasses. I don't know how many bombasses happened. Maybe 3 or 4 bombasses happened over time.
Yes.
And it cannot be all of a sudden put in a pressure cooker situation that you want to change something that is fundamentally going to impact on the on the governance process of Kenya Inc. of the company called Kenya. And governance processes, whether they are political or corporate or whatever it is, require sober thinking, and they require a lot of reflection. They require looking forward, not looking at now. Because a lot of times, if you change governance for the purposes of today, that governance may not necessarily be the best going forward. But if you look at governance and say, we need to change the governance of a state or of a company because of our strategy over the next 5 to 7 years, and you make it relevant to move you to that space, then I am all in favor of that kind of change. But changing for political expediency, for me, is something that I would consider inappropriate. It has to be because the nation needs a change that is going to be positive for the nation going forward in another 5 to 7 years. And and trying to push things in a pressure cooker situation means that you may perhaps make a decision now that you might regret in the future. Despite the fact that there may be a lot of feeling that yes, all these things have been building up and we know what needs to be done. But that is a historical movement that has brought you up to now. We need to stop thinking about history and look forward. And I mean, one of the things that put on that table is saying that we need to go for digital elections. Let's talk about that.
Which is a pet subject of Dr. Shem Ochuodo.
That is what we should be discussing in this in this situation, because that is something that will move us forward. It's not sort of trying to take us back to what happened, right? We are talking about moving forward and saying, we saw what happened, let us create change for the future. And that change for the future for me in terms of removing all this, who does this, who does what and so forth, is going to digital elections.
Thank you. Let me welcome Dr. Shem Ochuodo. Good morning, good to see you.
Good morning, Debal.
Yes, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Yes, so also one of the issues that we'll be discussing is from the National Treasury and regarding the excess stamp that is coming into effect, Patrick. People are saying this has to go through Parliament. Even if you add a little bit, an inch, if that particular needle goes a jot higher, it has to go through the approval of Parliament. So I don't know if you're conversant with that, and but let me just hear from Dr. Shemocholo before.
The bill, first, I wanted to appreciate the point Patrick was making of digital elections is the only way forward. In fact, I would even go further and say mobile elections, not just digital alone, because it could be electronic. But mobile, an old mama doesn't need to travel 20, 30 kilometers in Turkana to go and cast a vote. Yeah, but having said that, the Treasury, maybe why don't I let that pass for chairman of Vision 2030?
But he's not the chair of the Treasury.
I didn't quite get the question.
Thank you. Thanks to the bell, colleagues, Patrick. Yes, thanks. Good to see you here today. Yeah. The bell, the issue the whole week now is the dialogue. Eh?
Yes, yes.
Yes, the bilateral dialogue. Going to the end game, I like that. But I hate the process.
You hate the process itself.
And I also hate its implications for elections. What's the decision algorithm? What, when you decide what needs to be the outcome? And normally we're looking for a winner. Only one person can be president. This confuses that whole thing. And it has major implications for the future. That's all I can say for now.
Okay.
In that regard of the bilateral, if the I think what the country requires is more than bilateral. Because bilateral gives the impression that, one, it's only the political class that's important, and two, that just the two major coalitions. But I'd want to remind Kenyans that the Kenyans who registered to vote but didn't vote were higher than the votes that either of the two candidates got. So clearly there are many more Kenyans who are not in either of those coalitions. So what we require is a multi-partisan approach, and for me I wouldn't even call it dialogue. What we need solely, and recently we had a meeting of the dialogue contact group, multi-sectoral, led by some of the religious leaders that we've seen in the scenes, both 2017 and during last year's elections. And the premise was that what we require is a national conversation for reconciliation and inclusion, not just a bipartisan approach. So if my urge to the Kenya Kwanza government to take this opportunity, there are historical issues that has been dogging this country. If the leadership would be magnanimous to have them addressed once for all, I think we would go a long way. I would be a little more candid to say that I'm glad to have seen what happened in the US, where a former head of state is being put on trial. I think time has come when we should realize former presidents, former prime ministers are not above the law. And I'm hoping that Kenya will get, and Africa will get to that stage as well, where everybody is under the law, not some people being above the constitution, so that they're answerable for their actions.
Indeed, indeed. And there is also the process being scuppered by Okiya Omutata. Senator Okiya Omutata now is moving to the courts to actually stop now the process of actually getting new commissioners right now. Saying, especially the select panel, that is unconstitutional. I don't know how that will affect the composition of IBC. Also looking at one of the constituencies, that is, we had member of parliament from Basani, who passed away, was it last week? And so we might be thrown into a constitutional crisis since
Mandela.
Yes, for Mandela. Yeah, so that if it's not constituted in time, then what does it portend for that particular constituency? Onyasi Sakwa, I know you're previously a member of parliament.
Sometimes it does take time because even if you look at when the commission has always been fully constituted, the time it takes for the speaker to communicate to IBC and for IBC to declare the vacancy and give a timetable, sometimes it's quite long. But in this particular case, people have argued, but not being, me not being a lawyer, I'm not able to answer, to say predetermined routines like a by-election do not require a commissioner. The secretariat can manage that. But others have argued that without a quote-unquote a commission to have authorized that by-election, it is not valid. So let's see what the lawyers will come out with. But the truth of the matter is that you can run an election purely with the CEO and the secretariat. By election, for example, in this particular case, you're not changing technology. You're not. You're just going through the same routines. Yeah. But having said that, very quickly, I want to react to what Shem said here. I can't let that pass. I think we must have a way in which we determine leadership succession. It must be a clear formula. It can't be an ad hoc arrangement each time there is an election. And in politics, we've always known, I know that, I ran 4 times. There is only one winner. You can go home completely sore and sour, but there can only be one winner. The rest of it, we carry on. The state is not the only source of our livelihoods. People want to have something, rather, from the back door, the front door, and so on and so forth. That's my frustration now. We are confusing the rules of the game. And what Mr. Bath here said, and Mr. Chodha said earlier about digital voting patterns, solves part of that problem. And the other problem that will not solve is the expectation that you can't lose. If you can't lose, you must get back into government by some other means. That's still a problem. But determining who the winner is, there's no issue there. And this last one was closed from what we knew. So you're likely to feel that with an inch I could have been the one in there. So there'll be deeper frustration, I understand. But there must be a clear rule. Who becomes president? The winner becomes president.
Indeed. All right, let's see.
But, I think the issue of when you look at the British Parliament, where effectively, you have somebody who the loser, or whoever it is, the majority in the losers becomes the official opposition,
Yes.
right? And they actually are funded, and they form a shadow.
True.
A shadow cabinet, a shadow whatever it is that follows the government.
Which is
right?
exactly what we have got now.
That
we should have now.
That is what we should have.
Yes, because this is the law.
Yeah, and it's in the law.
Yeah.
So I don't know why it is not happening, but that would actually take a lot of this pressure cooker situation out. Because once, if you lose the election, you then become the official opposition, and you've got that accountability process.
Yes.
And you've got to hold the current government to account.
And
you shadow them exactly, so you have your own experts. If it's in labor, you have your shadow labor minister.
Yes.
Who is shadowing that person, and so forth and so on.
Precisely.
And that way, right, the whole issue of checks and balances, which is what a whole political system is supposed to do, is in place. And I don't see why it is that difficult. Right?
If I may add, I couldn't agree more with Patrick, because we need to have 2 things. One, we need to have a strong opposition, not just at the national level, but also at the county level.
Yes.
Secondly, we need to have an alternative government. And that's what the shadow government does, the opposition in this regard. So yes, I think what I'm not seeing much of is the alternative views. If Azimio was to be in government, what would they be doing and doing differently? And the same should trickle down to the counties. I would be very happy to see the shadow governor, the alternative, giving also their views on how to run the county government. I mean, that's just how civil societies work.
That would have given me a job.
I know. I know. Would be nice. Would be helpful.
And on a serious note, I also want to say there's this perception about the word. I use this word lucrative. I'm getting it increasingly to be an ugly word, almost a dirty word. And what is lucrative in this country is the state, is government. You make money when you are in government. You're paid little, but you come out rich, billionaire, or even better than that. You make money when you are associated with the powers that are. And that, I think, is something we must stamp down, because most times it's illegal. Then we would probably get people saying, should I be in government, should I be outside? I could just do as well outside and so on. Then we can take care also of vengeful actions or laws. But for me, that's really what's driving this whole process. Yeah, you have lost an election, you have lost an election. I mean, I would very much like to be governor today. But I lost the election. I even went to court, and the court pronounced on it. That's the end of it.
That's the end of it.
Now,
So you accept?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Now I don't even stand up to the governor for the sake of it. But
Right.
I have commented once or twice when I really feel that things are going off track in ways that are not partisan.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should tolerate this at the national level, where we open entry through the main door, through the windows, and you can even get it through the roof. That's a problem.
Through the roof.
Yeah.
Or the eaves.
Like those gentlemen that were bringing down, to Jesus, that person through the roof that was ailing for Jesus to hail them.
Oh.
The crowd had really massed the house. But let's see what is fresh off the press this morning by looking at, of course, the bold paper. This is the Standard. This is what is headlining the front page of the Standard today. Ruto Raila hardliners set to lead talks, it says. Tough nuts as the country waits for bipartisan talks agreed between President Ruto and Raila Odinga to begin. The Kenya Kwanza and Azimio la Umoja leadership are leaning towards picking tough representatives to the team of 14 expected to chart a way out of problems facing Kenyans. Who is in and who is out of these key negotiations? And this story is well fleshed out for you on page 4 of the Standard today. April 11th, that is a date when Kenya Kwanza will hold its parliamentary groups meeting to bring our members up to speed and get their concurrence. Of course, today we know Azimio la Umoja also, they are holding a meeting with their parliamentarians to just thrash out this particular matter. It says here, our leader Raila Odinga has made it clear over our terms of engagement with Kenya Kwanza. Azimio MPs will be meeting today to be updated and to air their views. That is what we have on the front page. And you can see some of the faces of the hardliners splashed out here on the front page of the Standard. On the side, but there, Trump says U.S. going to hell after date with courts. That you can expect it from Trump. And this story is on page 2 and 3 of the Standard today. Looking on the ticker on top here, ESCC Oginde's pledge to crush corruption. And that is tucked on page 7. Why there is tension in Jerusalem. And this is what, Patrick, we were talking about, the tension in Jerusalem right now, that we have Easter coinciding with Ramadan, and the contentious, of course, Jerusalem is a place of worship for both, so they're torn in between there. Ping pong on sweets for change, that is on page 23 of the Standard. Liverpool, Chelsea, drop affair. That is what we have on the front page of the Standard. Right. Well, I just wanted to ask to comment especially on the ESCC, on the fight on corruption. If I may just speak the brains of Patrick, because I remember you and also Bishop Oginde were very, very instrumental in coming up with that particular conference that we had at Bomas of Kenya on the fight on corruption moving forward. I don't know, from your own assessment, since that particular conference, was it in 2019?
It's 2019.
2019. Yes. Until now, have we lost that particular, momentum on the fight against corruption? But let's just begin with Oginde's now leadership now as a nominee of the ESCC chair.
I think going by his pedigree, from what I know, and I know him personally from the things that we've done together, I think he has the right interest, he's got the right belief, and in terms of the person himself, I think he's also the right person to go there. I don't think he has any, at least with the best of my knowledge, he doesn't have any skeleton sitting anywhere, right? And to be a person to lead an agency like that,
yes,
you need to have zero skeletons. So nobody can come and start cutting things from you and accusing you of various things, like happened with the previous with the previous leader of that organization. So I think what he brings is the understanding of all these different ways and the different views around how to stop corruption in this country. Having worked with us in the private sector, he worked with, always he represented the faiths, and you had civil society within that particular, discussion. So he's seen it from all angles, yeah. And I remember when we actually had that conference, I think I mentioned it to you at that time, that we had a session with the clergy. And we challenged them and said, there's corruption within the church, or within the religious systems. And we did a survey that we had done. And the very same
churches?
people, on churches, we had a group of church people and asked them about corruption. And it turned out that, yes, within the churches, there was corruption, right? And it was a very sobering thought that whilst we may see things very, nice and rosy on the outside, you find that the money that you put in as sadaqah, as your offerings, what happens to that money? Quite a few times, those things, once it goes in, they're used for different things. And when you begin to probe that, you find that there is some misappropriation within that process. Yeah, and this came from the clergy themselves. It didn't come from anybody else outside, right? And this was a reflection of really where the where the fabric of this country is at in terms of corruption. And we really need to start from our own value system and the culture and the way we bring people up, right? And not just bringing people up in the homes. I think it starts with the homes. It starts with parental responsibility. It starts from that level.
Yes.
And then you begin to look at the institutions that as people grow up, what do they go through? If you look at the school system, you look at look at the school system that people go through. Look at if they go to the market and things happening in that place. All these things add up to Patrick Obath 20 years later and the kind of thinking he has about how he's going to survive in this country. Yeah, and you see it happening on a day-to-day basis. So Bishop Oginde has got a tough job.
It's got a tough job.
Yeah, corruption isn't going to be solved by a corruption agency. They have to set an agenda, and I think they have the agenda, which is much wider in terms of a complete. I won't call it civic education. I think it's just education in total, right from scratch. I remember when we went to school, I don't know, Daktari and Mheshimiwa, their chairman, when you went to school, they used to have something called civics and history.
Yes.
In the lower primary.
In the lower primary school. And that particular subject was all around civility and integrity, ethics, and so forth. So civics, as a subject, was actually setting that foundation. I tell my children about civics these days. That's what is that? It's it's been lost.
Allow me to compliment and wish Bishop Dr. Ginde very well. Indeed, in one meeting with him, I said, "Oh, your bishop was my schoolmate." He said, "Not just schoolmate or classmate, but deskmate." So we're that close from far. And he's somebody I can very much vouch for. Not only in school, we went to the university also together. And he was a chair of Christian Union. And I'm happy that he seems to have upheld those values that we had to date. The Bal, I must also mention, I've come to find out rather belatedly that in this country, not everybody called a thief is a thief. And not everybody presumed clean is clean. So this is one good thing, in my view, I'm happy about for the change of government. Had we had Azimio continue, I think would have gone off track, because you would have found a lot of people being sanitized at some building up the hill, and others being victimized wrongly. So I am hoping that Kenya Kwanza will take the opportunity to live with what the Bal you normally call the true north. That those who are answerable, who are culpable, are brought to account without anybody being above the law. But having said that, the Bal...
Let me backtrack. You said
Yes.
that had Azimio
Continued,
they'll have gone
I
off
think,
track.
Yeah, I think we've seen...
In what context?
We've seen a number of cases that were political, that look like they were politically instigated. And the only way to know that is when the shoe is on the other shoe, on the other leg, on the other foot. So I think that's like a good...
But why would you peg it on Azimio?
Well, because we've seen what they did. We all know what happened at Capitol Hill. People would go there, they get sanitized. I mean, even without due process. But I must mention that some of that has happened with the current administration as well. My premise is that, and this is why I was making an appeal to the current administration, that let's have that true north, so that people who are culpable, who have plundered public resources, are answerable and accountable. And at the same time, you make sure that you don't besmirch or witch hunt as has happened in the past. But having said that, I like also, and allow me also to compliment the Professor Vice Chancellor at Strathmore University. His premise is that the way we are trying to fight corruption is not going to work. He believes that what's required is amnesty and an open national conversation, such that there is open discussion. If there is anyone who has plundered state resources, people come up, own up, and it's recovered, it's returned within a period of time, and people say, going forward, can we ensure that this doesn't happen? The more I see the fight against corruption flounder, the more I believe that that proposal by Strathmore Vice Chancellor is the way forward. And I'm hoping that Bishop Uginda, as a man of God, will find it fit to call all the parties and have an honest national conversation and say, look, we've run this country the wrong way. Can we have a clean start? And can we instill the value systems? Lastly, the CBC, I think, had this suggestion or proposal to have value systems embedded. Again, like Patrick was talking about civic education. I think ingraining the value systems, and we don't need to look further than Article 10, our national values and principles of governance, to be embedded in our youth right from childhood in school, I think is the way to go. So above all else, in fact, when we had diaspora conversations of what needed to be changed in the curricula, most of senior members said the one singular thing, it doesn't matter too much which system, but have national values embedded, whether it's 844 or CBC. So I cannot underemphasize.
Okay. And we have last week also President William Ruto receiving the National Values Report, right, that has been prepared by the Public Service Commission, and this will be tabled in Parliament. I wonder what really happens with this National Values Report from the Public Service Commission once it's tabled in Parliament. Then what? In light of where we are, even if it's fighting corruption, we have to embrace what is embedded in Article 10 of the Constitution. But I've never really joined the nexus between Public Service Commission, that particular report, and what it is intended to do.
Yeah, first, very quickly on my part, I congratulate the appointment. I mean, I'm happy with the appointment of Dr. Oginde, following in the footsteps of Obukala, Archbishop Obukala. Initially, I was worried about the clergy getting involved with these very murky, worldly affairs, but I think they have brought some sanity to it, and I hope that Dr. Oginde will continue to do the same. On the issue of the report on values, in Parliament, there's always and I don't know the current structure in Parliament, they have expanded the committee structure quite a bit. This could go to legal, probably that's where it will end up, and they'll review it, they'll make any comments, and they'll table it on the floor of Parliament, usually just by way of putting it on the schedule and notifying members that it's there. If there are any contentious issues, or if anybody dares look at them, they may debate them on the floor. So I guess it's just one way of the executive saying, hey, we have this, but we need your nod on it. Then it becomes a sort of official document that you can use and follow. But all of this, in my view, start with us as individuals. Everything starts with you as an individual. How you behave, how you bequeath this onto your family and children, and what in the eyes of the family will appear to be appropriate or inappropriate, and as they get older, what in the eyes of society is appropriate and inappropriate. But I think that later on we must have individual accountability. The law needs to take course each time there is a breach of the law at all ages. If you get a 7-year-old who just knocks off people's teeth here and there and so on, something must be done. You're not going to take them to jail, but there must have a quasi-judicial, juvenile judicial process, perhaps to give counseling, perhaps to get into the family and see where the problems are. You get older, you must carry responsibility. Because what happens now, if we say, like Shem was saying, we have a national conversation. I think that's good. If, for example, we end up with very many cases in the court and the courts can't handle it, we say, let us talk about this crisis. But before we get there, individuals must carry responsibility for the bad things they've done, for the breaches of the law. That should be always done. As it is now, you can get away with the way the court seem to be overwhelmed, the way the police system seems to work. You can do the most heinous crimes, and by the time they get to you, it'll be 10 years down the road or longer. I think it's completely inappropriate. First, we should, I think, increase our surveillance, our law enforcement processes, strengthen the capacity so that people begin to feel the difference between breaching the law and being on the right side of the law. That is now, it's like it doesn't really matter. That's, I think, and we know why sometimes it doesn't matter.
Right. Thank you. Let me open Bill Okero. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Thank you so much. We're just discussing, of course, what we have on the dailies, and now with the assumption of office of the chair of the EACC, we have the nominee, Bishop Oginde. We're just looking on how, moving forward, some of the challenges and some of the highlights that will be on his shoulders moving forward on fighting corruption in this country. Just briefly, I don't know if you're intimately familiar with the Bishop Oginde as well.
No, I'm not familiar with even the bishop, except what I have read in the media.
Yes.
But I think the office of the chair of the Commission of the Ethics and Ethics and Integrity is a very important one. But over the years, I think Kenyans seem to have, lost a lot of confidence, because there isn't it has not met the expectations of Kenyans, especially in the last 10 years, really. We are inundated with reports of corruption, grafts, really huge in government, in public service, in many institutions. But the level of response, has been very, to say the least, muted. It's not as expected, really, so the expectations are very high, but particularly in this government, when the focus on corruption seems to be very limited, or is not really as pronounced as, for example, when Kibaki came in, or when other transitions have taken place. There hasn't been, and then there has been challenges. Questions have been raised on the way many of the cases that were in court have been withdrawn. Charges, in the last, administration, there were a lot of allegations that the institution itself, the EACC itself, and other institutions like KRA and DCI, all of them being used to weaponize the war against corruption. And the results we have seen are cases which have been withdrawn, and the DPP coming out very strongly saying that, look, we were forced in taking these cases to court, and they have no merit. So I think that that confidence in the institution itself needs to be rebuilt more than anything. And I think it's important to see whether the bishop and his team will exercise that independence, which is critical for that institution.
It did. The Daily Nation is holding this flash for us today. We had the Jubilee administration coming with the promises regarding the stadia in 2013. But now we have a revelation there that there is a scandal. Some of the dilapidated facilities have been turned into grazing fields. Ahead of the 2017 polls, the Jubilee Party duo of President Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto unveiled their re-election manifesto, promising to build multi-million shilling world-class stadia across the country. The projects commence soon after they took office, but 6 years later, they remain incomplete. After gobbling up taxpayers' money, the nation went on the trail of the contractors, including one linked to trade CS Moses Kuria. And we have the story well fleshed out for you on page 6 and 7 of the Daily Nation there. Benjamin Kubai, 295 million shillings for Marsabit Stadium. We have also Mark Mwendo, 299 million shilling stadium. That is for Wote. We have also WATC, that is, or WIETC president, not given his name, 304 million shilling stadium. That is for Kipchoge Keino. 259 million shillings to Cabinet Secretary Moses Kuria's Smith and Gold Production Limited won tender to build Karatu Stadium in Gatundu South, Kiambu County. We have also 274 million shillings. KRA Board Chair Anthony Maura's today's Todia, that is Maura's Todi Civil Engineering Firm, won a tender to put up Kirubia Stadium in Chuka. He claims he has done his bit on the project. Maybe you want to comment on this latest development as well, with some of his faces. And now we have Anthony himself, who is the chair of KRA, being implicated in this incomplete stadia. What do you think about?
You know, without getting the full facts, it is difficult to comment on these kind of things. You have a lot of construction projects whereby you start off with a lot of fanfare, and then the funding runs out, right? The money is diverted somewhere else, and therefore you cannot complete the construction, right? So this is one side of the story, that the construction is not complete. But until you have the full financial revelations, right, you can't start apportioning that, you know, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that, and so forth. I am sure that these you know, if nobody challenged them in the public procurement process and everything, they were properly done, right? Because obviously the contract was awarded, and we know that there's a Public Procurement Act that's supposed to govern these kind of things. Now, if the principal is not able to pay you up to a certain point and you incurred costs, any good contractor will say, I will stop now. I have so much still outstanding which I can stomach, and I'm not going to proceed until that has been cleared, and I am certain that the rest of the money is going to be made available. Yeah? And what you've seen in a lot of these instances is the minute something like that starts, it goes on. You get people who say, no, how was this thing awarded? We were not involved. We didn't know anything about it. And then you get, you know, it could be the county, you know, the county assembly saying, you know, we want to know what happened here, and therefore we want everything to be stopped. And things stop. And once it stops like that, a contractor to come back is not easy. And let's not just look at the stadia. Let's look at a lot of these infrastructure contracts around the country. How many roads have been built and then stopped? Yeah. And I'll even take a very glaring one here, Ngong Road, yeah, between Junction and Karen. That has stopped. And there's supposed to be street lights, there's supposed to be, guardrails, what have you, everything else on that road. It got to a certain point and then it stopped. And I can guarantee you that money ran out, or money wasn't appropriated for that job to be completed at a certain point. So the contractor walks off. And now to bring back that contractor is going to be very expensive. So nothing is happening because of the cost of bringing the contractor back. So looking at all these stadia, you got contracts happening all over the place. And the fact that, whoever was there, I think they picked up a few names. I don't know how many stadia are being done across the country. But this, I look at this and I think, yes, it's a great headline because of the names that are involved. Yeah. But I think below that, there is a fundamental issue about the money that should have been put aside for that to be completed. Rather than starting 47 stadia, you should have just done 1 completed, 2 completed, 3 completed. And in 6 years, if you do 2 stadia a year or 3 and start them off and complete, they could have done quite a lot. And that would have been a big tick of completed stadia. But again, there are some which have been completed. Quite a few. And I think the then government's key for getting these projects completed was to move around these national celebrations. You know, they were being moved around, Jamhuri Day, whatever it is, and so forth. They went around the country. And every time they went there, you saw the amount of work that was done to finish that stadium. I think they should continue the same thing. The current government should start going around and do that and get the stadia completed. From that point of view, I'm being cynical, but that seemed to be the catalyst to completing those stadia.
But what do you make of also member of parliament who, you're current member of parliament, but also involved in these projects as well? People will see that maybe you're using also, you're banishing your position and influencing.
Let me go back to a situation in a country where I was, in Malaysia, where the president's son, the then president, Mahathir Mohamad, he was part of a consortium that won a tender, a global tender, fairly and squarely. And what did the world come? They came back and condemned and said, why does the president's son, the prime minister's son, win a tender like this? And he just went back and said, the fact that he's my son, does that mean that he cannot live his life? So let me just ask the question, the fact that I'm an MP and I have a business, does that then stop me from running my business? The only time that it becomes an issue is if I'm in charge of the body that awards that contract. Then there's a conflict of interest.
Okay,
but
if you are in charge or you're a member of parliament for this particular constituency, and the study involved is for that particular constituency,
the BAL,
how don't you see there's a conflict of interest somehow?
I think you have both a point, but allow me to compliment the media for spotlighting issues like this, because Kenyans may never have gotten to know about them. But even before I give my opinion, allow me to compliment also the former Prime Minister and the President. Today is Thursday. We probably would be here, but worried how do we live here when it's all over, for calling off the demos and finding a solution for what it's worth. One area, I must admit, I don't agree with Azimio in many things, but one where I agree with them, when they say this thing should not just be bipartisan, it should include people outside parliament.
Sure, could we just go on with yes, please?
Having said
we discussed Azimio and we've had a belly full of Azimio since Monday.
There was the danger there was the danger of viewers thinking that this panel...
No. We've always held the panel, even with or without the demonstration.
Okay, thank you. Coming to this one, I think you're right in terms of being conflicted. If I'm an area member of parliament and there is a project probably funded by CDF that, although officially an MP doesn't have a say in, but we do know that indirectly the MPs have a say, in that they're usually the ones who appoint the people who run the CDF. Mm-hmm. I think I would consider it being conflicted, so I would rather stay away. But where I agree with Patrick is that you sometimes need to get the finer prints. It's also not true that politicians cannot do business. They can, as long as business where it's above board, it's competitive, and they are not conflicted. I think the fact that the conflict of interest, that you cannot judge your own case, I think is where the issue is. So that's the fundamental question one would ask, is that, was this done fairly and squarely? The one thing, maybe lastly on this, I like that the Kibaki administration did when it came to power was to complete stalled projects. I was hoping that the Kenya Kwanza, maybe instead of, or before starting new projects, look at the projects that are stalled, if they were being done the right way and if they were worthwhile, if there was a business case for them, that proceed and have them completed before you introduce new ones. I know that, of course, we have very little money left for development purposes, but whatever little that there is, it doesn't make a lot of sense for what we see, the eyeshaws of mega projects that are gathering dust without being completed, and they're not bringing value to the country. Even if it's another administration, particularly if it's an administration you had beef with, started them. But for the interest of the country, let's have them completed so that they serve the purposes where it's justifiable. Mm-hmm. But I think this is a good starting point. My challenge to my good former desk mate is these are the things to look into and show the world that things can be done for once fairly and square, so that the true north is found.
Okay. Briefly.
Yes, first of all, I think that this reporting, I don't know if it's an expose, but certainly this reporting is a very positive thing. We have a great tendency to get our contractors not complete their projects. But part of the problem many times is that state release of resources is irregular. It's not in accordance. All contracts specify how much will be paid at what point, what the trigger points will be along the line. And those trigger points cease to matter too much because government sometimes does not have the funds. Or let's put it more broadly. If you don't put in the funds as required, you can't get the outputs also as expected. I am a victim. I live off a road where my driveway starts off from the rural area, which just wasn't completed. And I went into elections, people are saying, if you can't get a road done outside of his own home, how will he become governor and function? It's not done up to today. And the contractor says, no, they owe me along the path, and you can't pay me only for this section. You must pay me my outstanding balances and so on. And the state, of course, is dithering the issues that are done. So I think it's important that this is revealed. MPs, by virtue of their position, would not have an influence on these kinds of contracts. But being an MP may give you a certain prominence in the area and a negotiating position, perhaps. But you see, this is bigger than any of the CDF fundings that you get. It's twice or maybe 3 times. From around 100 to about 300 is about 3 times. So, but people can, MPs in many areas are influential in their areas, and they may be able to influence this perhaps. But I think the issue should not even end up with the ESCC. That's now pushing it. Is that pushing it downstairs or pushing it upstairs? Pushing it downstairs, they will worry about it down the road. I think the key thing should be that in terms of contract management, the ministries that give us these contracts must be upfront in reporting where there are shortcomings, where there have been problems, and what those outcomes are, and report all the way to cabinet internally, but also to parliament. And let's have that information made public, including the beneficial contractor, the beneficial owners of the companies that have been contracted. Because they may be sitting somebody over judgment, and yet he or she is part and parcel of the problem inside the contract. I think these full disclosure rules and laws, I think will also help a bit.
Bill Okeros, so there is a suggestion that for the counties that are not able to pay their pending bills, especially for these contractors, if at all maybe they didn't get the full funding to finish their projects as well, there will be a fine of 5 million shillings. If you exceed now the payment time deadline, then you will be fined. And I can see the governors also, they're starkly denying this particular move or this particular bill. So in light of just coming up with the situation that we're in, many people will say, we were not given sufficient funding, that's why these projects were completed. Do you load this particular move? Should that be the effective way of actually also, so to speak, putting the governors or the counties accountable with the pending bills? And I know what is happening currently.
I think it's
or is a catch-22. No. They don't have money
no,
from the National Treasury here. You also.
Let me first clarify. I don't agree with my colleagues. The issue here, first, let me disagree with my brother here. This is not a report by the media. This is a report submitted to Parliament.
Yes.
By the Auditor General. That's all this paper is reporting. And the members of Parliament have said very clearly, and it's written here, that where a project was claimed to have been 45% complete and payments were made for 45%, when they went to the site, that completion was not up to that 45%. It has been inflated. In almost all of them, they said the completions were inflated and people were paid more money, than they were justified. The issue is not about money. What happens usually, the reason why these things are stalled is because you stop a project for the simple reason that you create you do a variation of the tender. This is a deal always done in the national government and contractors, and this is where this government loses billions of shillings. So a contract is for 500 million. Halfway through, we say, okay, we're doing a variation. There's something that has happened. There's something this way. We add another 100 million or 200 million, and this is a way of making money. So in all of this, from what I have read here now, members of Parliament visited each of them. And they're saying, the payments were not justified. Some of them, they are finding out that, even the land on which it was built was not, appropriate government land. So there are a lot of issues. And so really in a country where there's zero tolerance to corruption, when an Auditor General of the government says there's an irregularity regarding a payment made to a contractor, that person should not be in office. It's not about the media report. By morning, the CS should have been fired. For example, he's an office holder. The same thing with all the others who are working for government. Because the Auditor General, why do we have an Auditor General of a government? So, and the article, you know, the articles on leadership and integrity are very clear.
Yes.
And I agree with what he says. You know, the issue of conflict of interest is repeated 2-3 times in this article, very clearly. Any conflict between personal interests and public and official duties, the way, because it impacts on the public confidence, and trust of that office and so forth, the dignity of the office. How are you going to stand up and tell fellows, you know, you won the tender but you didn't complete? And no one wins. Let me say this. I mean, Patrick, you try and apply for any of these jobs. There is no way, with all your experience in the world, you will win a tender to build even a nursery if you are not connected.
Yes.
That one, don't waste your time. These things are not given because there's merit. Most of the time they are given. And I want to say this without any fear of doubt. The last administration, they made it very clear that contracts for the national government in constituencies should be given to members of parliament as a priority. I sat in a meeting where, you know, none less than the president ordered the CSs, Pati Hawa. Why? They want support in parliament. This is a fact. So these things, people don't just get them. They get them because they're doing, because of connections or because of...
So this is a blessing from the president?
They get these contracts so that they can support government issues in National Assembly. This is the fact. So that's why even now no one will take action on these guys. The auditor can write, ethics and recommendation will write, you can write wherever you want, but people will continue in office. And we'll sit here and say, we are committed to fighting corruption.
But Justice Akpa, did these blessings come your way?
No. Well, probably,
on a lighter note.
it's not everyone who takes
This is an exception.
But I think the bar,
Yeah.
I've never been blessed.
Can you allow me to just take a short break, then we circle back with that? Because even if there is variation on the contractual agreement, and it's gone through, you know, it's run the gamut of the entire procurement process and the blessings, or maybe the go-ahead,
I'll tell you how
yes,
that happens.
from the procurement regulatory authority. How then do you have variations and it doesn't go back through the entire process?
I will tell you how we can make money out of a contract. I'll tell you that.
Okay.
Don't worry.
I want to know how we can make money